One last night of fun before I settle for someone predictable and safe. Those words would replay in my mind for weeks, but when I first heard them through my phone speaker at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, they felt like a physical blow to my chest. I'd been scrolling through TikTok during a break from rebuilding a 1973 Harley Sportster engine when the algorithm served up a video that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my relationship. The caption read, "Tampa Bachelorette vibes," and I recognized the waterfront bar immediately. It was where Cassandra had celebrated just 3 nights earlier with her bridesmaids. I was a custom motorcycle restoration specialist, 32 years old, and 5 days away from marrying the woman I'd spent 3 years building a life with. We'd planned every detail of our wedding meticulously, from the waterfront ceremony venue to the yacht reception that would cost us $42,000. 180 guests had already confirmed their attendance, many flying in from across the country to celebrate what I believed would be the beginning of our forever. The video started innocently enough, typical bachelorette party footage of women dancing and laughing in a crowded bar. Then I saw her. Cassandra was center stage, champagne glass raised high, her voice cutting through the music as she delivered what I initially thought would be a sweet tribute to our relationship. Instead, she was explaining to her cheering friends why she was getting married, and her words carved out pieces of my soul with surgical precision. She called me predictable and safe, like those were character flaws rather than the stability she'd claimed to love about me. The camera kept rolling as she downed her drink and immediately began dancing provocatively with a man I'd never seen before, tall, muscular, everything I apparently wasn't. My hands trembled as I watched her grind against the stranger while her friends hooped and encouraged her behavior. The worst part came at the end of the 47-second clip when she followed him outside, and the camera caught them kissing passionately against a brick wall while her maid of honor literally cheered them on. I screenshot everything before the crushing weight of realization settled over me. This wasn't some drunken mistake or momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated betrayal recorded and shared for entertainment. I watched the video at least 20 times, each viewing confirming what I desperately hoped I'd misunderstood. The woman I'd planned to vow eternal love to had publicly humiliated our relationship and physically betrayed our commitment while her closest friends treated it like entertainment. Final payments for our wedding were due in 48 hours, and guests were already making travel arrangements for what they believed would be a celebration of true love. Instead, I was staring at evidence that my fiancé viewed our marriage as settling for mediocrity, and me as someone whose feelings were disposable enough to mock publicly. The custom engagement ring I designed and saved 8 months to afford suddenly felt like a monument to my own naivety, and our dream wedding transformed into an expensive farce I needed to escape immediately. Within 2 hours of discovering that video, I was on the phone with Elena, our wedding coordinator, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting in my chest. I explained that due to unforeseen circumstances, we needed to cancel everything immediately: the waterfront venue, the yacht reception, the photographer, the catering company, even the string quartet we'd booked for the ceremony. Elena's professional composure cracked as she explained the financial reality of last-minute cancellations, and the numbers felt like additional punches to an already battered man. $32,000 in non-refundable deposits and cancellation fees would disappear overnight, money we'd saved for 2 years by cutting every corner possible and working overtime shifts. Our wedding insurance, which I'd purchased thinking I was being responsible, would only cover $3,500 under their restrictive change of circumstances clause, leaving us financially devastated on top of emotionally destroyed. I methodically worked through our vendor list, calling each one to deliver the same devastating news while trying to salvage whatever deposits might be recoverable. The floral designer was sympathetic but firm about their no-refund policy. The venue manager expressed regret while explaining their cancellation penalties, and the catering company actually seemed relieved since they'd been overbooked anyway. Each conversation felt surreal, like I was dismantling someone else's life rather than my own, but I pushed through because the alternative was pretending that video didn't exist. Cassandra had been unreachable all day, probably sleeping off her bachelorette party hangover, but she finally returned my 17 missed calls that evening with confusion in her voice that quickly turned to panic as I explained what I'd seen. She immediately tried to minimize the incident, calling it harmless pre-wedding stress relief and insisting that her toast was just drunken rambling that didn't reflect her true feelings about our relationship. When I mentioned the kiss, she claimed it was just a peck on the cheek that looked worse because of the camera angle, a lie so transparent it would have been insulting if I hadn't already been completely destroyed. I told her calmly that our wedding was canceled, our relationship was over, and she should probably start making her own calls to explain the situation to her family and friends. The silence on the other end lasted nearly 30 seconds before she erupted into screaming about the money we'd lose, the embarrassment to both families, and the impossibility of canceling everything so close to the date. She never once apologized for her behavior or acknowledged how her actions had affected me. Instead, she focused entirely on the logistical nightmare and social humiliation of calling off a wedding 5 days before the ceremony. The next morning, I drove to the jeweler where we'd bought Cassandra's engagement ring and explained that I needed to return it immediately. The sympathetic manager offered me a 60% buyback on the $9,500 ring, which felt like another financial blow but was better than keeping a symbol of something that had never been real. I was signing the paperwork when Cassandra arrived at my condo with her mother in tow, both of them crying and demanding that I reconsider what they called an impulsive overreaction to a harmless mistake. Cassandra insisted the kiss meant absolutely nothing and that her bachelorette toast was taken completely out of context by people who didn't understand our relationship dynamics. I pulled up the video on my laptop and played it back for both of them, letting them hear her clear voice calling me boring and predictable before describing our upcoming marriage as settling for safety rather than passion. Her mother tried to defend the comments as nervous pre-wedding anxiety, but the audio was unmistakable. Cassandra had meant every word she said about viewing me as a consolation prize rather than her chosen partner. The conversation devolved into desperate bargaining as they offered couples therapy, postponement rather than cancellation, and promises that she'd never drink at social events again if I'd just give her another chance. I explained calmly that this wasn't about forgiveness or second chances, but about fundamental respect and compatibility that couldn't be restored with therapy or promises. The next 2 days became an exhausting marathon of phone calls to 180 guests, many of whom had already booked flights and hotel rooms for what they believed would be a celebration of true love. Each conversation required me to explain tactfully that the wedding was canceled due to irreconcilable differences while avoiding the humiliating details of exactly what had happened. Cassandra's extended family launched their own campaign of guilt and pressure, with her aunts and cousins calling to explain how much money everyone had spent on travel arrangements and gifts, as if financial inconvenience should outweigh emotional betrayal. I methodically separated our shared accounts, removed her access to my credit cards, and packed her belongings into boxes that I stacked neatly by the front door for her eventual pickup. Each item I packed felt like closing a chapter of my life that I'd thought would continue forever, but I pushed through because staying would mean accepting that my feelings and dignity were negotiable commodities. Saturday arrived with cruel irony. What should have been the happiest day of my life became a surreal nightmare of damage control and public humiliation. I woke up early and drove past our waterfront venue just to confirm that the cancellation notice had been posted properly by management. Over 50 out-of-town guests were already gathering in the parking lot in their formal wedding attire, clutching gift bags and looking confused as they read the brief notice explaining that the ceremony had been postponed indefinitely due to unforeseen circumstances. My phone rang constantly throughout the morning with angry relatives who had spent thousands on flights and hotel rooms, many demanding explanations that I couldn't provide without destroying what remained of Cassandra's reputation in our extended families. Her uncle called me screaming about his wasted vacation time, her college roommate sent a series of hostile texts about the money she'd lost on her bridesmaid dress, and my own grandmother tearfully asked if there was anything she could do to help us reconcile before it was too late. Meanwhile, Cassandra was bombarding me with increasingly desperate voicemails and text messages, cycling between rage about the financial losses and pleading for one more chance to explain her side of the story. She claimed the video made everything look worse than it actually was and insisted that her feelings for me hadn't changed despite what she'd said at the bachelorette party. Her sister showed up at my door in the early afternoon carrying a photo album filled with pictures from our 3-year relationship, apparently thinking that nostalgic memories would somehow erase the fundamental disrespect her sister had shown. I listened patiently as she talked about wasted money, ruined family reputations, and the embarrassment of explaining to their extended relatives why the wedding had been called off so abruptly. When she finished her emotional appeal, I explained that Cassandra had revealed her true feelings about our relationship when she thought no one who mattered would see or hear her honest assessment. The kiss was just physical betrayal, but her words about settling for someone predictable and safe showed that she fundamentally didn't respect or value what we'd built together. I told her sister that I refused to marry someone who viewed our relationship as a consolation prize rather than a conscious choice, and that no amount of financial loss or social embarrassment would change that reality. By evening, my phone had collected 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages from various family members, friends, and wedding vendors still trying to understand what had happened to derail what everyone considered a solid relationship. Within days, the TikTok video had spread through our entire social circle like wildfire, generating heated debates about loyalty, forgiveness, and relationship standards across multiple friend groups who suddenly felt compelled to choose sides. Some mutual friends defended Cassandra by claiming that everyone makes mistakes during stressful pre-wedding periods and that I was being unforgiving and rigid about normal bachelorette party behavior. Others supported my decision by sharing their own stories about similar betrayals and explaining that respect was the foundation of any healthy relationship, something that couldn't be restored once it was publicly demolished. The video became a lightning rod for broader discussions about social media, accountability, and whether drunken behavior revealed true character or represented temporary lapses in judgment that deserved second chances. Cassandra's family launched an aggressive damage control campaign, spreading rumors that she had been drugged or coerced into inappropriate behavior by friends who encouraged her to act out against her better judgment. Her mother called several of our mutual acquaintances to suggest that I was being manipulated by the video's misleading editing and that the kiss was actually just a friendly interaction that looked inappropriate because of poor lighting and camera angles. Meanwhile, my relatives rallied around my decision with surprising intensity, sharing stories about their own doubts regarding Cassandra's character that they'd previously kept to themselves out of politeness. My aunt mentioned how Cassandra had once complained about my income level during a family dinner. My cousin recalled her making disparaging comments about my motorcycle hobby being childish, and my grandmother admitted she'd never felt genuine warmth from Cassandra during our relationship. Various mutual friends attempted to broker peace talks and suggest couples therapy as a solution that would allow both parties to save face while working through their issues professionally. I politely declined every mediation effort, explaining that this wasn't a communication problem that could be resolved through counseling but a fundamental incompatibility that had been publicly revealed. The incident became legendary among our extended peer group as the ultimate cautionary tale about social media and pre-wedding behavior, with people sharing the video as an example of relationship red flags and discussing it at parties for months afterward. Some used it as ammunition in their own relationship arguments, others referenced it when advising friends about wedding stress, and a few even claimed it had made them reconsider their own engagement decisions after seeing how quickly trust could be destroyed by careless actions. For the next 8 weeks, Cassandra orchestrated an elaborate campaign to win me back that demonstrated the same level of planning and persistence she'd once applied to our wedding arrangements. She began with surprise visits to my condo, arriving with coffee and homemade meals while wearing the sundresses I'd once complimented, apparently believing that nostalgia and physical attraction could override the fundamental breach of trust between us. When I politely but firmly declined her gestures, she escalated to handwritten letters delivered daily, each one containing increasingly desperate apologies and promises to become the woman she claimed I deserved rather than the person she'd revealed herself to be. The letters detailed therapy sessions she'd supposedly begun, social media accounts she'd voluntarily deleted, and lifestyle changes she was implementing to prove her commitment to personal growth and our relationship's restoration. She enlisted mutual friends to advocate on her behalf during casual encounters, having them mention how devastated she was and how much she'd learned from her mistakes without directly asking them to intervene. My gym buddies started approaching me with stories about how she'd asked them to explain her genuine remorse and her newfound understanding of my value in her life. Even my coworkers received visits from her during their lunch breaks, where she presented herself as a reformed woman who'd temporarily lost sight of what truly mattered due to pre-wedding anxiety and poor influences from toxic friends. I systematically declined every overture while explaining patiently that the issue wasn't forgiveness but fundamental respect and compatibility that couldn't be manufactured through apologies or behavioral modifications. When she asked directly if our trust could ever be rebuilt, I delivered what would become my final statement to her by comparing broken trust to a deliberately shattered vase that someone had stomped on repeatedly before asking if it could be glued back into its original form. The metaphor seemed to land with devastating clarity because she stopped speaking mid-sentence and stared at me with the recognition that some damage transcends repair regardless of good intentions or sincere regret. Her final attempt came through a mutual friend who delivered an ultimatum disguised as a question: was there anything she could possibly do to earn another chance? Or was my decision completely final regardless of her efforts to change and grow? 3 months after what should have been our wedding day, Cassandra finally abandoned her reconciliation efforts and began dating a personal trainer she'd met at a CrossFit gym, apparently seeking the excitement and unpredictability she'd felt was missing from our structured relationship. Mutual friends reported that she seemed happier with someone who matched her desire for spontaneous adventures and physical challenges, though I wondered privately if she'd learned to value genuine partnership or simply found another person to project her fantasies onto until reality set in. Around the same time, I started seeing Riley, a veterinary technician who worked at the clinic where I brought my rescue dog for regular checkups, someone whose intelligence and compassion had caught my attention long before I was emotionally available to pursue anything meaningful. Riley found my passion for motorcycle restoration absolutely fascinating rather than boring, often spending weekends in my garage asking detailed questions about engine rebuilds and vintage bike history while genuinely appreciating the craftsmanship and patience required for quality restoration work. She never complained about the time I spent on projects or suggested that my hobbies were childish distractions from more important pursuits, instead treating my expertise as something valuable and impressive rather than an obstacle to her entertainment. On what would have been our 3-month wedding anniversary, I took Riley to a vintage motorcycle show in Orlando where she marveled at my ability to identify engine specifications and manufacturing years by sight, calling me brilliant when I explained the technical differences between various classic models. Watching her genuine excitement about something I was passionate about felt like discovering what mutual respect actually looked like in practice, and I realized that Cassandra had never once asked substantive questions about my work or expressed authentic interest in my knowledge and skills. The $32,000 loss that had initially felt devastating now seemed like the best investment I'd ever made, money spent to avoid a lifetime with someone who viewed our relationship as settling for security rather than choosing partnership with someone she genuinely valued and respected. Riley's enthusiasm for my motorcycle expertise reminded me that the right person wouldn't just tolerate my interests but would celebrate them, and that Cassandra's Bachelorette toast had inadvertently given me the freedom to find someone who saw my stability and reliability as strengths rather than consolation prizes. As we walked through the vintage bike display that afternoon, Riley slipped her hand into mine and mentioned how lucky she felt to be with someone who had such deep knowledge and passion for his craft, words that would have sounded foreign coming from Cassandra but felt completely natural from someone who actually appreciated who I was rather than who she thought I should become.